running a little bit behind, so I'll just hand over directly to Gethyn Ellis. Take it away.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. Yeah, I'm conscious we are running a little bit behind. I can do this at warp speed. I can do it at 4-day speed. We'll go at whatever you need to get your train home later on. This is going to be a lot less technical than Chris's session. This is something I've been working on for the last few years, really, and it's kind of evolved over time. So, I'm from I'll tell you a bit about me in just a second, but my background is very technical and it's very sort of Microsoft data platform-esque. And one of the challenges I've seen organizations face as I've been going around my sort of consultancy travels is they've got the platform and they've got all the outputs, but there's actually no outcomes being derived from their investment. And I've seen that quite extensively on my travels. So this has kind of evolved from the work I've been doing in that space, which isn't really particularly technical, but it does lend itself well to the book I wrote a couple of years ago. But I'm not here to sell you a book, so I'll get started. So I just want to sort of set the scene there. It's not really about Power BI features, but it is about using Power BI, right? So it's not about your DAX or your sinks or your Dataflow Gen 2 CI/CD or Gen Dataflow Gen 3, as it's not going to be called. But most organizations, right, or the organizations I work with anyway, they've got dashboards and they're not short of reports, right? Sometimes they're short of clarity and sometimes they're short of confidence and action. Right, so this talk is really about how to turn Power BI from a reporting tool into a decision-making tool and applying some storytelling principles that I've learned and picked up over the years as well. All right, so just to set that scene, I'm deliberately telling you that. So if you do need to, if you are here for the hardcore deep tech stuff and you've got a train to catch, I'm okay if you don't want to hang about, right? I'll just tell you that right up front. So a little bit about me, and I'll keep this brief. My name's Gethyn Ellis. I'm a Welshman that lives in Wolverhampton, so I'm only up the road. I've got a train to get to, but not for a while yet. I've been working in the data space since I left university 25 years ago, and I started out with a variety of different jobs, from a report writer to a web developer. Then I spent a fair amount of time as a DBA for a local authority and a police force in South Wales. And then I started my business around about 2007 doing SQL Server upgrades, and I learned a little bit about analysis services and reporting services as part of that process. And I'd had a little bit of experience with the BI stack when we upgraded to SQL Server 2005. So you can tell I'm old, right? I'm an old person who's been doing this a long time. 2007, just before the great financial crash of the time, I started about a week before the run on Northern Rock. I started my consultancy business. I'm still here. I'm still going. I've survived Brexit. I've survived all sorts of global pandemics and recessions. Anyway, I'm still here, right? And we've evolved over time as well. So as the cloud has become more widely adopted in our customer base, we've offered a variety of different services in that space, and we still do the managed data platform, virtual DBA type stuff. But now more and more I'm getting involved in sort of analytics, and one of the key things that I've been involved with for the last 4 or 5 years is organizations trying to make more from their data and more from their investment in things like the data platform. And there has been, I've noticed, a gap between organizations. They've got all the cool tooling, they've got all the data in place, but the people who need to make a decision are not really engaged with it. And we've been doing quite a lot of work in that space as well. So this is really all about telling a story with your data. All right. Every organization I've worked with, you might recognize this scene. I've heard people laughing. So just for clarity, I've not designed any of these myself. These are all derived by ChatGPT, right? But they've taken my prompt and they've put them all on there. A lot of people, this scene resonates with a lot of people. You've got a leadership team, you've got lots of dashboards on the wall, you've got charts and numbers everywhere, and yet everyone's filled with uncertainty. Right? People are looking at the screen, they're looking at each other. Right, and the subtext of this is, what are we exactly supposed to do with this? Right, and that's the core problem I wanted to highlight, is dashboards on their own and reports on their own, they don't drive decisions. Right, if they did, every business would be running flawlessly by now, because I'm sure you've all got loads and loads of them. Right, and organizations are not lacking data. Right, they're not lacking reports, they're not lacking dashboards, they're lacking the clarity, confidence, and action. All right, so if you may have seen this many times in your organization, you've got your dashboard there, everyone's nodding along in the meeting, then someone asks a question or two, and then someone says, we should look into that. Right? And then nothing actually happens. Right? And it's because the dashboards, they present information, but they don't necessarily present understanding. Right? And we kind of assume if we show enough charts, if the numbers are accurate, if the visuals are polished, the audience will naturally join the dots and reach the right conclusions. But the reality is these are busy people. Right? They're multitasking, they're probably on their phone, they're probably checking their emails as you're talking to them. They're not living inside the data the way a report author might live inside the data. And there's ambiguity or noise or those distractions. The brain simply defaults to doing nothing, to inaction. Right? And you know, there's a little bit of uncomfortable truth in that, but that is what happens. Right? So data visibility is not the same as decision making. So why does this keep happening? And it's been happening for a very long time. And I guess sometimes we can confuse data and charts and insights as being the same thing. Right? There's a deeply ingrained assumption in analytics, perhaps, that data plus charts gives you that insight. Right? And if we just visualize things clearly enough, the meaning's going to emerge all on its own. But that insight doesn't appear by magic. Right? If you put numbers on a bar chart, it doesn't mean anything. What happens is people get cognitive overload. They see patterns, but they don't know which one matters. They see trends, but they don't know what's driving those trends. Well, they might see anomalies, right? But they don't know whether they need to worry about it or not. So if the insight isn't explicit, people fill the gaps with assumptions. And when different people make different assumptions, you get debate instead of a decision. So that's why lots of analytics conversations end with questions rather than conclusions, right? The chart is technically correct, right? But that story hasn't been told. Right? And there is a reality of data overload. You probably get to see this all the time, right? And this, you know, data growth has been exponential, right? And I've heard this the whole of my career around volume, velocity, variety. But what that translates to in terms of our reports is cognitive overload. Right? People are expected to absorb more information, do it faster from more sources than possibly ever before. Right? And this is why analytics exists in the first place, right? Not to show everything, but to help us cope with that complexity. So storytelling tries to bridge the gap, right, between overwhelming data and meaningful insight. Now, in analytics, we want to try and create clarity, not complexity. Okay, so it's not about tracking everything. It's about making sense of complexity. It's about identifying patterns that matter. It's about solving real business problems. Right? But clarity is key. It means someone can look at the report and understand what's happening here. Right? Why is it happening? What decision is needed? Right? If your analytics increases confusion or increases debate or increases uncertainty, then it's perhaps doing the opposite of what it should. Right? And it does perhaps involve a little bit of a mindset shift. Right? Analytics is not a reporting function, it's a decision support function. Right? And if you can change that mindset, everything else goes with it. Now, those of you that I've chatted with a few people tonight, and some people go, oh, I kind of remember you, you know Andy Cutler, and you know this person, that person. You know, some of you may have read some of my blogs before, some of you may never have seen them before, right? So I'm not going to make any assumptions that you've read my stuff. But I like to write about stuff that I enjoy, right? And I enjoy working with tech and I enjoy football, so I kind of blended the two. And the Premier League make their Fantasy Premier League data available. So I thought I'd write a report and consume it and build some nice Power BI reports in it. It brings it into my training classes that I deliver around Power BI, and it makes them all resonate with people. And then what you get on the feedback in those evals is, great class, I hate football. Right, but that's what you do. I can't please everybody all the time. But my point is this: football and sport has become very, very data driven. Right? And during the pandemic, I had a person come on my podcast called Simon Jones. Now, Simon is a friend of my colleague Mark, and Simon is what's called a coach's coach. And he has worked extensively with the Lawn Tennis Association on improving their coaches and also with Chelsea Football Club. And in that conversation, we got talking about the use of data in football. And Jurgen Klopp, when Liverpool were doing quite well at the time, and they hadn't lost all season when the pandemic kicked in. And we got chatting about how football managers would use data. And he's going, well, look, I've seen some of your stuff, and he's not going to come in and just, Jurgen Klopp's not going to get up in the morning and go, I know, I'll go and check Power BI on Teams. All right. But what he might do is if someone can prepare a report for him or send him an email or send something to his iPad that gives him the key metric that he needs for that day, he's going to use it to make a decision. And that kind of sat with me for a long time. I kind of sat there, oh, that's really, really quite interesting. I haven't quite thought about it like that at the time. And then it got me thinking about another sports story. Has anyone ever seen the film or read the book around Moneyball and the Oakland A's? A few hands going up. If you haven't seen it, I'm about to ruin this film for you, so apologies in advance. But it's based on a true story. Around about 2003, I think, the Oakland A's had a really decent season. And their general manager, I think his name was Billy Beane, got told by the owner that they needed to, basically they had a really good season. All the big teams, so it's like Wolverhampton this year in football, right? Manchester United came and picked up, and Man City came and picked up their best players, and off they went. And they needed to rebuild, but he didn't have any budget to rebuild. Right, this is why you see this in football now. So he discovered somebody called Peter Brand. Peter Brand was a Yale economics graduate that had found himself with a job in baseball. And Peter Brand shared this concept. I forget the author of the book, but there's another author involved that they're applying his concepts to. And they boiled it down to data. And in the film, it's all about data, but they actually boiled it down to one metric of what they would need to build a better team, right? And what players should they sign? Do you know what the metric is? Do they get on base? Do they get on base? And do you know what the value was? 0.34. So 34% of the time, if the player get on base, they could sign them. All right, so they had all these top players that didn't perhaps have that stat, but were really expensive because the market said that they were good. All right, and they had all these players that nobody wanted because they weren't the right fit, the right sort, the right type. All right, people, the scouts in the film are calling them misfits, and they signed them. And he had fallouts with his scouts, he had fallouts with his coach who was picking the team, and he refused to pick certain players, and he basically traded players, so he had to pick the side based off the stats. And 0.34, basically, all that means is when you go to a baseball, you get 3 goes to hit it, right? And you've got to get on base. And if you get on base 34% of the time, you're always scoring. All right, so they worked out how many home runs they needed in a regular season to win, bolt it down to that metric, and that's the stat they worked off. Nice and simple. Easy for Billy Beane to understand. Now it's a really good story because that's what, it's a true life story. That's what they did. And there's a big link here to football as well, because the Boston Red Sox are owned by Fenway Sports, who own Liverpool. Once they've gone through this season and, they built their team off their, do they get on base question. They approached to sign Billy Beane and offered him a job, and they made him the highest paid manager in baseball history. He turned that down. Fenway Sports embraced it. They went on to win the World Series several times, and then they were involved with Liverpool around the time Jurgen Klopp got involved. They followed a similar strategy for their transfers. Granted, I don't know what the question is they ask. It's definitely not, do they get on base? And with the variables in football, there's probably a few more metrics involved as well, given the different positions and stuff. But that brought Liverpool's success, and you got Tony Bloom, who owns Brighton, changing Scottish football as we speak, because his other side, Hearts, are running away with the Scottish Premiership after he bought them last summer, and he uses a similar strategy for his transfers. Anyway, I digress, and I've gone off far too much of a tangent. So this is my Power BI report. This is my example of a bit of a messy report, to be honest with you. You look at that, you're going, what is that telling me? It's not telling me a lot. Right, this is perhaps a bit more clearer. What transfer should I make this week? Now, granted, this is taken from a few weeks ago. Please don't take this as making your transfers this week, and you've missed the deadline. But Bruno Fernandes, what the Premier League do? They have a estimated next points value based on the data they've got on the player. So the real metric for picking your fantasy team is who's going to score well next week. And if you haven't got time to look at it, you can just look at that and go, right, I need Bruno Fernandes if I don't have him already. Right, then you might need to go that a little bit further because you might already have Bruno Fernandes and you want to know who the next top player is. So then you delve into the middle. Right, but I'll come to that in just a second. All right, so I got a bit too far ahead of myself. Right, so in terms of the storytelling mindset, right, your Power BI report is not a spreadsheet. It needs to be a story. And every good story, no matter the format, follows a structure that we all instinctively understand. Think about the films and books that you've read over time, conversations with friends. If you jump straight into the middle bit, right, you might feel a bit lost. Right? And if you never finish it, you feel very frustrated. Anyone seen the film Lost? The series Lost from about 2005? Didn't finish for me. Still have nightmares about that. But it leaves you feeling very frustrated, right? Because stories are built on this simple but powerful structure of having a beginning, middle, and end. Right? Now, the beginning gives context, right? And lots of our dashboards, mine included, and I'll stand by that, they jump straight into the middle. I've got this, I've got that, I've got that, I've got that. And it's, by skipping that beginning entirely, you then open if you go straight to the middle, you're going to confuse people. That's the crux of what I'm trying to say. All right. If you instantly see the metrics and charts and comparisons, but no explanation of what they're for, it's like walking into the cinema halfway through, say, a film and wondering what's going on. Right, you start asking yourself questions there, or if you me, ask my wife, and then she tells me to leave the room. I know she doesn't want to watch the film with me if I'm coming in halfway through. But what's this about? Why does this matter? What problems are we trying to solve right now? Why should I care? Right, and that's the simplest question. Why should I care? If it doesn't do that instantly, it's going to create some friction before that insight even starts. Now, the middle bit, we've probably all got quite a lot of good middle bits. This is where most of our Power BI reports, or any reports for that matter, can hold their own. Right, this is the exploration phase, the breakdowns, the charts, the trends. Right, this is where you explain what's happening, what's driving it, what patterns are emerging, what's surprising. And it's essential, right? But most reports stop and start there. They present the data, they present more data, and then they stop. And that's like explaining the problem in real detail and then walking away mid-sentence. Right, if you've ever seen the film Wreck-It Ralph breaks the internet, there's a scene at the end of that where Fix-It Felix and his wife, whose name I've forgotten, has gone straight out of my brain. They'd adopted all these children that had been made homeless because of their game, and their game had gone out of order. And they said, oh, the secret to great parenting is, and there's a whole bunch of noise while they explain the answer, and you miss it, and you're like, I need to know what that was. All right. Right, so if it doesn't end properly, it's not quite finished. All right. So with your end, all right, this is I guess it's going to answer three simple questions. So what does this mean, and what should we do next? All right, and my report there says we need Bruno Fernandes as captain this week, but we might need to do some different things as well. All right, now I've done quite a bit of research on storytelling over the years and story structure. And on this slide here, this is kind of a mindset shift for anyone wanting to tell a good story. Right? And as Power BI developers and report writers, we might want to do that. That's about framing where you sit and understanding who the report is for ultimately. All right, but in storytelling, there's going to be a hero. Right? And in our Power BI reports, it's going to be the report audience that's the hero, not the data, not the dashboard, not you as a report author. And once you understand that, you'll design and present your reports, and how you go about it will change completely. So most analytics projects, they go wrong, right, because they cast the characters or the wrong characters as our hero, right? And it's usually the data that ends up in the starring role. Okay, so even technically excellent dashboards, they might not move people to action. right? So someone probably might, turn up your dashboard, look at my FPL dashboard, it's wonderful and fantastic, right? Lots of charts and drill through and other things, relationships, my measures are amazing, right? It's very technically impressive, but it doesn't quite land, right? People will lean forward and go, what does that mean? What should we do? Right, and then the room then becomes interpretive instead of decisive. Right, and it's not because the data is poor, right? It's just because the report was built as if the data was the hero. Right? And if the data becomes the hero, the focus shifts. Right? You focus from the clarity you're trying to provide. Do they get on base? To how many stats have we got on all the baseball players in I was going to say the NFL, but you know what I mean, the baseball league. Now, in terms of the hero's journey, right, we can use that same storytelling pattern behind all your favorite films, from the Star Wars and Matrix and every great narrative. Right, the hero faces uncertainty. That's your end user making a decision. They're going to encounter some obstacles, and they need someone to provide them with clarity, or something to provide them with clarity. And that is where you would sit as a report author. You would sit as the guide, right, who helps them move forward. Right, the audience is the hero. You're the guide. Now, I've got some stuff down here, some examples of that. Right, so you think of like Lord of the Rings. Any Lord of the Rings fans in? Yeah, who's the hero in Lord of the Rings? The little hobbit, I'd say. I can't remember his name. Frodo. Frodo's the hero. Who's the guide? Gandalf. Oh, was you going to say Sam? Sam as well. Sam's a guide too. That's they both. Harry Potter. Harry's obviously the hero, right? Guides there. You might say Dumbledore, right? You might also say Hermione and Ron and his friends that help him on his journey. And he doesn't always make the right decision, but there's a guide there to help him along the way. All right. So if you apply that to your how you go about developing your reports, how can I get X to make this decision? All right, you need to present it in a way that allows them to make the decision, right, and shows them what they can do when they get there. Yeah, so I guess the key takeaway from this is data doesn't drive change, heroes do. Right, and if you can use the data to make the hero take action, then you're serving your purpose as a guide. Okay, so right, you're the guide, you're not the hero, and if you accept that, your role becomes very clear. Right, you don't show off, you don't necessarily overwhelm, you remove obstacles, you reduce confusion. Right, you help someone reach their destination or decision safely. Right, so whilst you will have all the technical skills to do this, you don't need to demonstrate those. You want to help someone succeed to make a decision, right? Like the morning coffee report for Jurgen Klopp and his team's, key analytics. All right, so that means anticipating questions before they're asked. It means removing unnecessary choices, perhaps having and holding an opinion about what matters. All right, and that's why great analytics, do they get on base? It feels simple, right? Not because the problem was simple, it's because they did the hard thinking before that report was built. So good reports, they start with a decision, not data. And if you can anchor your storytelling to decision making, right, you basically need to start with the right question. Often we start with the wrong question: is what data do we have? And that doesn't necessarily lead us anywhere useful. Lots of exploration, and that might be needed at first so we can understand that. Don't get me wrong, but that's not what you want to present as your story. Lots of wandering and a dashboard full of connected visuals. Right, better question is, what decision are we trying to make? What decision is blocked? And that'll create focus. It'll define what matters and what doesn't, and it'll give your report a purpose. All right, so you start with the decision. The data then becomes a tool, not your starting point. And that's a really good practical change that will hopefully improve the decisions that get made from your reports. And again, identify your audience. Who's the hero? All right, different audiences don't just want different levels of detail. They might need different stories. Right. So, you know, if it's an executive in the business, they might be asking, are we on track? What needs to change? If you're an operational manager, you might be asking, where should I focus my attention? If you're an analyst, it might be, is this real and what's driving it? And if you're working on the coalface in the front lines, you should be saying, well, what should I do differently tomorrow? And if you try and answer all those in one report, you end up answering none of them particularly well at all. All right. So audience clarity matters a lot. All right, and you can have the same underlying data, so where all the self-service stuff in Power BI comes in, you can have the same model, the same data, but different stories that you present into your end users. All right, so it's not about one perfect report, it's creating the right report for the right decision maker. And clarity beats completeness every single time. All right, so once you know the audience and you then define the business problem, all right, and this, you might get stuck with this as well. All right, clarity beats completeness. A good business problem statement doesn't try and describe everything that's happening. It answers, what's the problem? Why does it matter? And what happens if nothing changes? Right? And if you can't answer those three questions clearly, the report's going to drift. And you'll add just one more visual and one more metric just in case. And before long, you're back being overloaded again. Right, so having a well-defined problem acts like a where clause on your filter, and it helps with performance. Right, anything that doesn't help answer it, we don't want to be bringing it into our report. Now, this is a lot of psychology in and around this as well. Right, you know, we're all aware human attention is limited, and our reports need to respect that too. Right, and perhaps this is where neuroscience meets report design. Short-term memory is limited. Most people can comfortably hold somewhere between 3 and 5 things in their head at once. Right, and then but beyond that, performance drops pretty sharply. If we ignore this, right, we build dense dashboards. Right, we're asking the brain to do pretty much impossible work. Right, we expect people to scan, compare, remember, and decide all at the same time, and that's not how we think. It's not how humans think. Right, so our storytelling and our storytelling approach to creating our dashboards, it should work with the brain, not against it. So we want to reduce cognitive load. Right, that'll guide attention, and then we can sequence information instead of dumping it all at once. So having that simplicity, right, is a really, really good or really, really useful requirement. Now, when dashboards fail, they fail for a number of predictable reasons. Right, too many visuals competing for attention, too many colors, too many messages with no clear priority. Right, the brain doesn't know where to look first, so it doesn't look anywhere. Right, or it looks on what is the most visually dominant, not necessarily what's the most important. Right, and people then say, "Oh, I'll come back to that later," and they never do. Right, so the good report doesn't ask the audience for hunt for insight; it makes it unavoidable. Now, grouping can create meaning. Right, so structure can turn your numbers into understanding. So on the left-hand side here, we've got some ungrouped data, lots of numbers, all technically valid, all correct, right, but probably cognitively exhausting. The right-hand side is the same information grouped into concepts, performance, revenue, licenses, and then suddenly it becomes much more understandable. Right, so grouping is a really powerful tool in data storytelling. It tells the brain what belongs together and what doesn't, and it creates a hierarchy and emphasis without adding complexity. Right, so in Power BI terms, this is about layout and spacing and containers and intentional structure, not just your visuals. Right, and if you group well, you stop asking the audience to interpret that raw data and start sharing the meaning. Now, what I'm talking about here is all based off German psychologist, and I'm going to try and say it, and I'm going to apologize in advance if I get this wrong, right? But something like Gestalt psychology and Gestalt principles, and you know, even before someone reads a label or a number, their brain's making sense of the layout, right? And alignment, which we can see on the left-hand side there, that tells us what to compare. Right? Similarity tells us what belongs together, and proximity tells us what's related. Right, now these principles work when we can acknowledge them, right? Or they work if we acknowledge them or not. Right, so if we ignore them, the report still tells a story, it just might not be the one that we intended. Right, and this is really data-driven storytelling meeting. This is where it becomes psychological, perhaps becomes physical, if you like. The placement of the visuals, the spacing between them, the consistency of the design, all influence interpretation. All right, so hopefully a well-designed report doesn't need heavy explanation. The structure guides that understanding. And then what comes next is deliberately shaping attention so your story unfolds in the right order. All right, so when we apply this to Power BI, everything we've talked about up to now sounds quite conceptual. So the psychology, the storytelling, the cognition. All right, and we're going to try and make it a little bit practical now. All right, so these principles, they don't sit outside Power BI. They show up in how you design your reports. Spacing tells the brain what belongs together. Alignment tells the brain what to compare. Similarity creates patterns without explanations. And that consistency builds trust and reduces the thinking effort. All right, so none of this needs new visuals or custom themes. It's just about intentional layout. All right, if you've got two reports with the same charts, they can tell completely different stories based on how they are arranged. Choosing the right visual. All right, very common question people ask is, which visual should I use? That happens all the time on my Power BI training courses. The better question is, what question am I trying to answer? All right, and then before choosing the visual, you want to answer, what question does this visual answer? What comparison actually matters? And what should follow from that? All right, if you can answer those, or if you can't answer those, then the visual doesn't belong, even if it looks good. And that'll reframe your selection. All right, so you're being responsible in your in the visuals you create. All right, it's not there to decorate, it's to reduce uncertainty and move closer to a decision. Now, good visuals, they reduce the thinking effort. All right, so that means perhaps one message per visual, not three, not it depends, one clear takeaway. All right, and this is why the titles can matter so much on your report. The title shouldn't describe what the chart is, it should explain what the chart means. All right, labels say what, titles should say so what. All right, so we don't want our context living in tooltips or being explained verbally in meetings, although that probably can help. Right, it needs to be built into the visual itself through comparison, through reference points and emphasis. And when that visual tells a story on its own, it's going to survive and be used long beyond the meeting that you presented it in. Okay, so I've got a little bit now on the sort of structures of these stories, but in the interest of time, I'm not going to go too fast, but I'm not going to go into the detail I was planning. All right, but the opening of your report sets the frame for everything else that follows. All right, so the beginning of a report is going to answer the critical questions. What are we looking at? Why does it matter? What triggered this conversation in the first place? And why does it matter now? Okay, if you haven't got that at the start, then the rest of the report, the audience is going to spend the rest of their time looking at the report, trying to orientate themselves, thinking about the decisions they need to make. All right, so this is where perhaps context lives, time frame, scope, definitions, not buried in the documentation, but visible and obvious. All right, so if you get a strong beginning, it earns your attention. All right, and it'll signal that the report's got purpose and that the audience time is being respected. The middle is where the exploration and explanations live. All right, so you unpacked what's driving the outcome. Bruno Fernandes is the person to transfer this week, but you don't need Bruno Fernandes, you need a defender. Okay, and it's in this middle where you can look at that exploration and you can look for the explanation and explore the data too. All right, so we can unpack the outcome. What factors are influencing the result? Why is Bruno Fernandes in this week? Is it because he's playing Wolves? All right, what's surprising, what's unexpected in there? All right, it should still feel guided. Right, so you're not dumping analysis on the audience, you're walking them through it step by step, helping them build the understanding rather than force them to discover it on their own. And of course, every story needs an ending. All right, the end of the report needs to answer the so what question. What decision should be made? What happens next? All right. If it ends with here's the data, your story's not finished. All right. So a strong ending, again, reduces ambiguity. It gives people confidence to act. And even if that action is we need to investigate further, then that decision needs to be explicit. All right. But again, often this is missed out in many reports. Now, everything we've covered and spoke about today, it comes down to perhaps a shift in how you see your role as a report author. And I know I'm talking about people as if you're writing reports here, but hopefully you can see the reframing of your role, and that change in mindset can really help. Right, so from building reports to guiding, from metrics to providing meaning, from data to decisions. It's not about building fewer dashboards for the sake of it, or more dashboards for the sake of it. It's just about building purposeful ones. Right, and when they're designed as decision tools, that adoption will naturally increase. And a lot of where this come from for me is adoption and getting clients to use the data products more. And I've ended up here. So there we go. What this looks like in Power BI, the same data can produce radically different outcomes. All right. Now, this is important. This kind of removes excuses. Right? You don't need new data. You don't need a new model. You don't need the latest and greatest AI, although don't tell Microsoft I just said that. Right? With the same data, you can create a narrative flow. Right? Fewer but stronger visuals, faster, more confident decisions. And that's not a technical difference. That's just creating your reports with intent. So key takeaways. Right, if a few things you take home on the train today as you're drinking another beer before you all go home. Right, it's designed for how people think, not how the tools work. Right, if you can structure your reports like stories with a beginning, a middle, and an end. Right, remember, your job is to guide, not impress. Be the Gandalf of the story. Don't be the Frodo. Right, be the Ron, not the Harry. I just thought of a Toy Story and the names I got on my head. Don't be, is it Buzz Lightyear? And then the cowboy, what's his name? Woody. Be the Woody, not Buzz. And if you get those right, your reports will become naturally more impactful. All right, so just a challenge for you to take away today. You know, look at your last report, the last report you created. Who's the hero? What's the story? What action does it lead to? And if you can answer those, then you're probably doing a good job already. And that is where we come to. I've compressed that down into about 45 minutes. So I'll leave you with the same idea I started with. Dashboards don't drive decisions, stories do. And if you can combine Power BI with storytelling, don't just show your data, create clarity, create confidence, and create action. And that's me done. Thank you.